So, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to see so many people interested in this topic. And I will have a presentation which is partly about our project, the Missing Link project, and partly an introduction to the background that actually inspired this project. So, as I said, so the first part of the presentation will be more an introduction to what has been the background to the research we are conducting within the Missing Link project. And then we will go more into detail what we are doing within the project and what we are expecting to have as a result at the end of next year when the project will finish. We started the project in 2020, so as you all know, with the pandemic, it became very complicated to travel to Sardinia and to try to set up the whole thing. So it's, let's say, the first 2 years have been very difficult. But it was, as I will show later, we tried to come up with ideas. So in order not to just sit at home and wait for the pandemic to go away. And we started a small side project, which is giving also very interesting results. And I will show you during the presentation. The most important, so about the background, what happened during the Bronze Age, let's say during the second millennium BC, there is quite a dramatic change, especially in Eurasia, with the introduction of bronze, or the technology that is connected to the production of bronze. And Levant from Göteborgs Universitet in Denmark, who has been working with early bronzes from Scandinavia in particular, she has been coining this term bronzization to talk about the beginning of the second millennium. And she has been in areas of Eurasia where you actually have access, in particular to tin, because tin is this component that you need to produce bronze, which is not so common everywhere and very necessary. And we will arrive to the issue of tin by the end of the presentation, and Sardinia at the end of the presentation. So there is multifarious evidence suggesting that, in particular, maritime routes and means of transportation must have played a fundamental role in this expansion and development that you can see in Eurasia during the Bronze Age. So, despite many evidence from all over the continent, the bulk transport, the bulk trade probably actually happened on water. And we have evidence of this among other things. For example, in what a researcher also from Göteborgs Universitet, Johan Ling, and also from Ruhr-Universität, University, Marta Diaz-Gomino, they have been working on this cosmopolitan code, looking at, in particular, rock art and representation of figures and objects, which are often located along maritime routes, and maritime routes which in later years have been shown to have been connected by the metal trade. What is necessary to do now is to understand how the metal trade actually worked and developed in this enormous region, and also what happens at the local and regional level, of course. And what the Missing Link is doing is working on the regional level of Sardinia, but setting in the largest context of the Western Eurasian metal trade. The Bronze Age is a period of, in general, economic growth, we would say. It's a time in which Europe is really, how could you say? It's there is a lot of interesting things happening all over, because I did the old-time civilizations, like, for example, Elargar, you have Minoans, Mycenaeans, the Hittites, you have the late kingdom in Egypt, the tumulus culture, the fantastic, you cannot see it, but the coffin from Scandinavian top there under the. So it's a period of diverse culture and blossoming of different groups, languages, and people all over the continent. And everywhere you have, as you can see in some of the pictures, an astonishing bronze production, both for tools, weapons, different types of attires for the clothing, and like you see in the bottom also, ingots and raw material that is circulating. And the long distance trade seems to reach really what looks like global dimensions. These studies that we are conducting now have been in later decades, let's say, in particular, Scandinavia has had a leading role when it comes to metal trade and long distance exchange and trade, and especially producing new, very useful data that prove the existence of these large networks. This was a project that started in 2012 in Gothenburg, and actually the aim of the project was to demonstrate that Scandinavian Bronze Age communities were using the local abundant copper resources that you can find all over Scandinavia. But nobody had ever studied the composition or the isotopic composition of the Scandinavian material. So the project decided to do that. And when they sent the samples to the labs and got the results, the picture changed dramatically. So people, the last thing that you were expecting is that basically all the material was produced with copper that didn't come from Scandinavia, from none of the Scandinavian sources. And not only that, most of the material comes from very far away. Most of the copper comes from the Mediterranean, the Iberian Peninsula, from Sardinia in part, from Cyprus, as you can see there in the picture. Now, during the years, a lot more projects have been following up the results of the first set of analysis, and the picture stays the same. As you can see here is a list of all possible sources of metal used during the different periods of the Nordic Bronze Age to produce artifacts, bronze artifacts in Scandinavia. And there's different authors and different universities, different labs, and the results remain confirmed. Now, although the lists are quite extensive and there is quite a lot of different sources that are listed here, one could say, to summarize, that most of the material seems to come in the early phase of the Bronze Age, so between 1700 and 1500, from the Austrian, Central European Alps and from the British Islands, with smaller quantities from the other areas. After 1500, you really see quite a dramatic shift. So some of the other producers continue to send or to produce copper that is used in Scandinavia. But when you do the analysis, most of the material seems to come from the Iberian Peninsula. And right now there is actually also in Gothenburg again, and in collaboration with Sevilla and with Ihrem University in the UK, a project about Andalusia mining sites, which are really extensive and probably were producing enormous quantity of copper during the Bronze Age. This is the site, you cannot see it, but it's the new West Swedish project. This is the site project that we started during the pandemic, because the studies that you have seen before were covering large parts of Scandinavia, but not very much. So there has been material from Norway, from Denmark, and from different parts of Sweden, but the coastal area of Western Sweden was left out. And we decided to, since only a few samples had been taken from the region north of Gothenburg, we decided to analyze material from the region of Halland. We have a PhD student that is working with settlement structure in Halland, so we had access to material that was connected to her work. And also one of the members of the Missing Link project is working with material also from the internal area of Västergötland in Sweden. So we analyzed this area that remained uncovered by previous project. And we, as you can see here, we have our first results, so from the late Neolithic and the period 1, so of the Nordic Bronze Age, and then from the central part of the Nordic Bronze Age and the later part of the Nordic Bronze Age. And the picture is confirmed once again. There is a lot of different sources, a lot of sources from far away from the Mediterranean area. Also, of course, the British Islands and the Austria or the Alps. But in general, we seem to see over and over again this long distance connection between Scandinavia and the Mediterranean, which needs somehow to be explained from the archaeological point of view, since, for example, the materials culture of the Nordic Bronze Age is very specific in Scandinavia. So we are really talking on an advanced system of interconnection between different worlds and the necessity to travel down to the Mediterranean or to the producing area to collect the raw materials in the first place. Of course, and as Constance said, I'm interested also in other materials, in wool in particular, and Scandinavia is a perfect setting for wool because the oak coffins that I showed in the picture before are 7 very well preserved Bronze Age graves where the conditions, the microclimatic conditions of the grave preserve perfectly all the organic material from the grave. So we have 7 complete clothing and blankets from 7 different individuals from Denmark. And this clothing can be seen, it's at the National Museum in Denmark, it's exhibited. And there are also reproductions that you can test on yourself and look like a beautiful Bronze Age elite person. And they're made of wool, and the wool has been analyzed recently by means of strontium isotopes, and the strontium isotopes show clearly that none of the sheep that produce the wool that has been used to make these clothes has been grazing in Denmark. Now, Denmark, this kind of studies, the strontium isotope provenance studies, are relatively easy to do in Denmark because the local strontium baselines are very limited. So whatever it doesn't fit in this very limited span, it's of course from outside the Jutland Peninsula. In other areas like Sweden, Scandinavia, Germany, Italy, Sardinia, that would be much more difficult because the span is much more complex. But in any case, the wool confirmed that not only copper and tin were coming from outside, but also wool, and wool must have come also in large quantity, despite it must have been during the Bronze Age an expensive good. And the same has been confirmed recently by analysis of the glass pearls. There is blue glass pearls that have been found not in enormous quantity, but in several graves from the Bronze Age, again mostly from Denmark, where they have been conducting the analysis. They have been shown the chemical composition of the glasses has been traced back to both Mesopotamia and Egypt. It is believed that there is now the technology to produce this material was not available in Scandinavia during the Bronze Age, so they were imported as ready material. Now, maybe pearls are a little bit easier to import than tons and tons of copper and tons and tons of wool, but still it shows that the global, we like to call in Gothenburg, Bronze Age trade and long distance connections, it was very complex. And to give you an idea, maybe most of you are already familiar with this, of how different interlocking systems could have worked at the beginning of the second millennium. There is the fantastic example of the Kanesh Kultepe site in Anatolia, where we have the even more fantastic opportunity not only to see the material culture, but to have the written records of the trade, the extensive trade that was going on in this region, and the level of organization that could be reached already at the beginning of the second millennium. Of course, here we are in the eastern in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Anatolian Peninsula, very advanced setting. But this is locations that are in connection with the rest of the Mediterranean. So they can be very interesting to use and to think about when we want to imagine the complexity of the system, as I said. So the archives from the Kanesh area are describing quite in detail the constant and intense trade that was going on between Kanesh in Anatolia and Assur in Mesopotamia. And the archives, I will show you a picture of the archives in case some of you are not familiar with them later in the next slide. They give very detailed information about quantities. And in this case, the trade was not going, was not through seafaring, but it's a land-based trade, and it shows that it was done with caravans, and the caravans in some of the letters are with up to 500 donkeys in one travel. So these 500 donkeys and the people that take care of them need to stop every day and need to eat and to drink water. The trip is about 1,100 kilometers, and there is a very well-organized system of places where you can stop and get the refreshments you need. You pay in cash metal, in ingots, pieces of metal, and there is guards along the way. And there is a postal system, and this is what we have from the archive. We actually can read all this through the letters that the people were writing to each other from Kanesh to Assur. There is a banking system and quite an interesting knowledge about faraway places. And also what I find more interesting, and this is because of the textile research, there is people investigating about the taste of the other culture. So in the letters, they actually write to, normally the Kanesh houses are these merchant houses, and this is family companies, and part of the company is, the main company is established in Assur, and then there is one person, normally it's a family company, it's a husband and a wife in many letters. The wife stays in Assur, and the husband moves to Kanesh and settles there, and they write letters to each other, and they both complain. The most interesting letters are the complaining, because they write, oh, you told me that I should send 2 tons of wool, but then some part returned, or what you wish is not clear, what should I send? And the other one, I told you to send this kind of textile, they sell very well, everybody likes them, but not the other one, because that one, I don't know what to do with it. So it's really an interesting picture on window on the past. So this is the site. It's the local tell with the town, and this is the merchant area. So this is the villas outside in the Kanesh Karum area, and it's about 40 houses. And this is the archives, the inbox of in the houses, and the letters look like this. I don't know. I find them fantastic. So this is the envelope that has been signed with the cylinder sigil, so that you know who has been writing to them. And then you open the envelope and you will have the letters inside for you. And then you can send your answer. And most of these, if I get the whole system right, most of the people keep a copy of the letter that they sent. So you can actually follow the correspondent from Kanesh, because you don't have the same from Assur. So it's pretty impressive. It's thousands of tablets from this side. But back, what about Sardinia then? Back from the fantastic finds from the Near East, which was always impressive. The system is very well developed already in the 3rd millennium, and actually you can see in Anatolia at the beginning of the 2nd millennium. But during the 2nd millennium, during the second half of the 2nd millennium, then you start seeing you don't have the same amount of documentation, you don't have the written records, but in the same way as you could have in Anatolia, but you see a movement of people, goods, and raw materials that is actually beyond imagination for what we can imagine were the possibilities of the time. And the archaeology in Western Europe has a major role, and as it has happened for Scandinavia, because we don't have any written record whatsoever, but we have the possibility to do analysis on the material, isotopical and chemical analysis of the material, and try to trace them back to the area of origin. So I won't go into detail about, also because you cannot see very well, but about the archaeology of Sardinia, and it's an island with many of you, I understand, have been there or linked to the projects that Constant is leading. So, but it's a very complex archaeology in Sardinia. Not only the archaeological material is impressive in many ways, but it's very difficult to interpret and very difficult to date. I think chronology is one of the worst things you fight with when you work with Sardinia. Unfortunately, everything is out there, monumental and visible, and that doesn't help stratigraphy and chronology, and it makes everything complicated. You're probably familiar with these pictures. So the landscape of the island is, even today, still dominated by these impressive megalithic towers. Really, there is many different kinds. They have been built all at the same time. There is some sort of evolution from lower, more square building to the tower Nuragic complex, Nuragic towers. But as you can see in this map, the density of the archaeological record from the Nuragic period is tremendous. The Sardinia must have been really densely populated. Some more picture, and must have been the local population, I imagine, all extremely active, because to build this Nurag, and when you visit one, you see the immense amount of work that has been done to create this structure. They are, as you can see here, for example, I've been visiting now several times the Nuraghe and Rubio, where I think you mentioned the Fulvia, Schiavo, and Mauro Pera have been here, and they're working here, and both here and in other places, they have been doing really a massive work to reconstruct the shape, the form, how these Nuraghe were built and how did they look like. And there is help from not written records, but from miniature reproduction of Nuraghe. This, I think, said in a simple way, you could say that I think the Sardinian people really worshipped or were impressed themselves by what they managed to achieve, because this reproduction of Nuraghe are a little bit everywhere, both in stone and in metal. So we have an idea how they could look like. We have the remains of the upper part of the towers that have been collecting from the broken part, and this is you can see the top, but this is the reconstruction that has been proposed for the Nuraghe Arubio here, where they have been calculating the height of the main towers. This is around 30 meters, and this has been calculated also more or less also for other monumental sites. So we have a situation in which, with an island where at some point during the second half of the second millennium, you have densely inhabited landscape with very monumental structure, and but very little is known about how they build it and how did they use the landscape around them. We keep discussing that it would be very nice to have better knowledge about the landscape covered, the woodlands, and there is around the Rubio. It is clear that at some point during towards the recent Bronze Age, the forest has basically disappeared, and even today the island is quite desertic. I would say there is Mediterranean bushes and small trees, but it's nothing as the primordial oak forest that was supposed to be there before the Nuragic people started building these impressive towers. So they must have been changing the surface of the island dramatically, and still very little is known about how and in which way. And this is connected to the MISLINK project as well, because we are trying to prove that they were also able not only to build this impressive structure, but also to use the mineral resources that the islands offer. Sardinia is very rich in many different minerals, and as I will show, it seems you can trace back through topic analysis several metals that have been found in and outside Sardinia, but we lack completely traces of ancient mining. There is traces from the historical period, from the Phoenician period, from the Roman period, the Middle Age, and the modern time, but not yet published, at least from prehistoric Bronze Age time. And prehistoric Bronze Age time must have been a time where the forested area of the island must have been abused in an intensive way. When it comes to burials in Sardinia, the Bronze Age burials do not help to get a proper picture of how the society was organized. And there is also a debate about if it was a very hierarchical society or if it was a society where different roles were played in other ways than through consumption, as you can see, for example, in the Aegean or in other areas of the Mediterranean. You have collective burials and very, very little personal items and very, very little status items that are to be found in the graves. Now, there is also, it has to be considered that the graves, the giant tombs, as they're called, like the Nuragic, they are out there in the landscapes, and people have had access to these graves all the time throughout history. So what we find today, there is very few excavations that can excavate a grave that hasn't been visited before many, many times. So there is a little bit of, sure, things were not exactly as we understand them today. Towards the end of the Bronze Age, there is there is debate about the date, but let's say the end of the recent Bronze Age, around 1100 BC, they stopped building the Nuragic. It's not clear why. There are some Nuragic, according to Mauro Perra, this is not something that I have seen myself, but there are Nuragic that are clearly stopped while they were building them. They arrived to 22 meters and then they stopped. They simply didn't continue. Others were not restored anymore. They stay in the landscape. They are used in different way, but they stopped building them. And this is also the time when you start seeing more and more of the so-called sacred wells, this fantastic, and also they have such a variety of shape and form, and they somehow adjusted to the landscape in which they are inserted. Wells where you understand that the water as a resource in different ways and must have had a very fundamental role. And it is mostly from these sacred wells, and rather than from Nuragic, I think that you have most of the figurative material that you can find today, you can see today in the Cagliari Museum and in Sassari Museum when you visit Sardinia. And this is also a very specific and peculiar material culture that characterize the Sardinian material and express a world of a fantasy world or a way of expressing things that is really peculiar to the island. It shares some characteristics. Now, lately, there has been a couple of studies that want to draw a connection between the helmet with horns that you can see on the figurines in Sardinia with the helmet with horns that you find in some boats in Scandinavia. Yes, we can discuss this. Many people will. It is possible. It's about this idea of the cosmopolitan codes that circulate between the Western Mediterranean and the Atlantic, and they signal sort of reciprocal knowledge of some. It will help people to recognize those with you have exchange with that you can trust. but much of what we can say is still very theoretical. What it can be said is that it is clear that Sardinian local population were very skilled smiths. They could, they had a very advanced metallurgy, and they could produce very efficient tools, very nice metal objects, and an immense variety of figurines of all types. What we can see from the metallurgy of Sardinia is also that they make an extensive use of tin, and to this we will come back, because it's we know that the island has copper resources. There is eventually also some tin, but it's not clear if you could really use it. But in their metallurgy, the items that they produce always have high percentages of tin, so it's abundant. They have access to this, and it must have been even more precious and costly than copper to try to obtain. So in this setting, we started the Missy Link project, which wanted to understand the role of Sardinia in this large international setting. And what we are doing in the Missy Link, we started with reviewing all the new archaeometallurgical data. As you know, there has been already during the 80s, the lead isotope, the technology connected to the analysis with the lead isotope was developed around the end of the 80s, and a lot of analyses have been produced and published in different articles from different areas. And but they are spread, and there are a few attempts to make database. It hasn't been really yet come to something that can be used widely by everybody. So we went through together with Sofia Straskerli, which is part of this project, and she was one of those that started actually the lead isotope back in the 80s. To review all the new materials. We have a lot more reference data from a lot more sources, so things are getting more and more interesting. And what we decided to do, it was to try, well, our primary wish is to identify traces of prehistoric mining. But we cannot produce them, but what we can produce is to have a fine-tuned isotopic and geochemical field of the Sardinian ore. So we are walking around doing surveys in the mineral districts of Sardinia, collecting sample and analyzing sample in order to be able to make this background research information that we will use to compare all the other data from the continent. And we're almost there. And then we also have analyzed and sampled objects from Sardinia, because during the past decades, there has been a lot of attention to ingots and very little attention to objects. But it's not easy to analyze objects to get permission from the museum. So it's, what we know, the background about the long distance trade and exchange with Sardinia is, why do we think that it is possible that Sardinia was actually a major actor in this long distance trade of metal? First of all, the numerous oxide ingots that have been found on the island. And here you can see some fragments. They are almost always found in fragments of this size, deposited in ores, from buried in different parts of the island, under walls, under nuragics, in sacred wells, and so on and so forth. There are over 40 different sites with oxide ingots. Almost all oxide ingots that have been found when analyzed show to be of Cypriot origin, as most of the oxide also in other areas. There is Mycenaean pottery in Sardinia. There is typical Sardinian pottery outside Sardinia. And there is the lead isotope and the trace element that have been long ago already shown that Sardinian metal could have been used. So about the oxide ingots, this is one of the last maps we made of their distribution. The oxide ingots are these large ingots made of pure copper, almost entirely produced with copper from Cyprus. to such an extent that it has been proposed that they are a sort of brand commodity. When you would see an oxide ingot, you would know that it is pure copper from the nice Cypriot copper, which is a very good quality one. But there are many question marks still about this class of objects. If you see the dated distribution of the objects, the earliest items come actually not from Cyprus, but mostly from the Aegean. And the one that come from Crete, there is quite an interesting group of them, which is made of copper of unknown origin. There is not been found yet. The isotopic composition of these ingots that date to 1600 and have been found in Crete does not match any of the sources that have been analyzed so far in the Mediterranean and Europe. In the second phase of expansion, when basically Cypriot copper becomes the dominant source for this class of objects, then you see that the expansion reaches from Sardinia to the Levant almost immediately. And then it continues this way until around 1200, when you start seeing quite a lot of interesting miniature items. So not except for this one in Baden-Württemberg and one from close to Belgrade, all the others are miniature items. So just that in any case, beside the central and eastern Mediterranean, there is some sort of interest in this large metal trade connected to the oxide, also in southwestern Europe. And this is confirmed by quite a few items that unfortunately cannot be dated, but have been found both in Croatia and in Bulgaria. In this picture, the most interesting place, I would say, is Sardinia, where you have over 40 different locations where oxide ingots in full shape, just a few, or in fragments have been found. In an island where you actually can produce your own copper, you have the largest distribution of fragments of ingots, which must have been also expensive ingots, I believe, produced with Cypriot copper. And they are stored. There is very little evidence that this Cypriot copper was actually used to make tools and objects in Sardinia. And this has been, as you say, confirmed by isotopic analysis. The oxide ingots are a complex phenomenon. You have not only the ingots that you find in the Mediterranean, but you have a lot of representation of them. They must have had an importance that was beyond their value as copper, a metal object, but also they must have represented, they must have been part of some sort of narratives. You find them in depiction, in graves. Here is an oxide person that is carrying an oxide. You find them represented in on Cyprus on many different items, including as a pedestal for or on seals. You find them in Sardinia. The oldest evidence for an oxide comes from a pottery sherd, where you have this reproduction of an ingot. And then, of all places, you find possibly them in the rock art in Scandinavia. This evidence has been debated, but there is 2, 3, according to some more. I would be more skeptical about some of the pictures, but this one is particularly interesting. It's close to a boat that is dated to the 1600, and it's close to a site where you actually have, I found early evidence of Sardinian copper, and then you have this representation that is very difficult to imagine that is representing something else than an oxide. And then lately we have been found in a grave from with very, very early metal items from Scandinavia, late Neolithic, early Bronze Age items. This little, it's actually clay objects in this very peculiar shape, which we hypothesize because it's empty on one side, was used to make stamps. We'll see. if others will come out now. But it's the article is to be published soon, and it has the shape that doesn't recall anything else than an oxide. Back to the evidence of Sardinia being involved in long-distance trade, we have the Mycenaean pottery. It's not very much, but it's there and in very significant places, mostly in the southern part of the island. And then we have the most interesting one. You cannot see what's written here, but this is the Sardinian pottery outside Sardinia. We have Sardinian pottery in Sicily. And this site is particularly interesting because they have been doing zinc section and analysis of the provenance analysis on pottery. And the Sardinian ware is both imported from Sardinia and locally made. So there were possibly people from Sardinia living in Sicily. There is Sardinian pottery from Lipari. There is Sardinian pottery from Crete, in particular from Comoros. And in the last 5-6 years, and this is where the missing link comes from, because we found this discussing with Peter Fischer, who was doing the excavation in Alla Sultan Tekke. He was showing to me this thing, these cups, and said, like, I don't know what is it, I don't know where they come from. And then maybe they're Sardinian. And so, and then this has been found before the Sardinian jar, but after the discovery in Alla Sultan Tekke, so the Pila Kokkinokrimos team realized that they also had Sardinian cups. And in the very last report, there has been suggested that there is the same cup also from a grave here close to the same place where you have the only sandstone mold for a real oxiding. So, and this is ceramics that is not the painted Mycenaean ceramic that you would expect being part of a large trade, being desirable items being transported everywhere in the Mediterranean. They look very much like everyday items that would travel together with the people that use them. In particular, in Alla Sultan Tekke, they have been found in pits, which are close to the grave, so in offering pits. And you have really the impression that it's people that are fully integrated in the ritual activities of the site. Alla Sultan Tekke is a large harbor. It must have been a very international place, and it's not unlikely that people live there, maybe like the merchant from Assur and Kamesh, and then also offer their own pots or the liquid, the wine that was contained in these cups to the dead. And this Sardinian pottery really draws very nicely sea routes throughout the Mediterranean. So there is, of course, this special relation to Cyprus, the copper oxiding, or the metallurgical tools. This is Fulvio Loschiavo, who has been trying to lift this for many, many years, that there is tools that have been produced in Sardinia, have been found in Sardinia, that are not local. They really show a technological know-how from Cyprus. And then there is ceramic. In Cyprus, there is ceramic of Sardinian origin. There is a lead of Sardinian origin, and other things we'll see. The lead isotopes, I'm not going into detail. It's not very, you have to trust me in this. You can read anything, but when you match the isotopic composition of objects from different places, like Cyprus, like Greece, like Scandinavia, you find quite a few match that compare very well with Sardinia North. And when you put these matches on a map, and then you have a situation like this. This is you cannot see it here. It was like, please don't take a picture because this is a working process. We have to double check. But what we see from our revision of all previous material is that actually the objects made of copper of Sardinian origin plot very nicely geographically close to the places where you have a distribution of oxides, where you have large pen resources, and when you have oxide images. So, and we believe that this is not by chance. But moving forward, the problem remained. We didn't find any mining activity, and we didn't know if the copper of Sardinia region was traded by different groups or by Sardinians themselves. And why Cyprus? Why the connection of Cyprus? One last, the Nuragic fleet. The traces of ancient mining. There is very little known. This is a map. This is a map from 1914, when they opened new shafts for the copper mines in central Sardinia, and the engineer that he pointed places where he thought he found evidence of prehistoric mining. There is nothing more than these dots, so we don't know what exactly. It could have been Roman, Phoenician, but in any case, it was obvious that it had been used. And what we do now is that we walk around and in Sardinia, and I can see that many of you also have experience of trying to make yourself through the Macchia Mediterranea, which is really thick and difficult. And we have been we found a lot of mining areas from the 19th and the early 20th century. They are very obvious. They are relatively easy to reach because often there is a path or even a small road. But once you arrive there, then it becomes very difficult to visit the site around because of the vegetation. So I believe actually there is traces on mining, but they're very, very difficult to find. And here is a little bit more. If you have been in Sardinia, you will notice that in the minerary district, like we have been mostly in the southwestern part of the island, there is basically mines everywhere. Some are big and well known. Some, as soon as you start leaving the main areas of the mines and you walk up, you will see that there is more and more sites up in the mountains. And the landscape is the same everywhere. Vegetation is very dense. And then it opens up in the area where you have the area where they discarded materials from the mines. Like this is the area of Saduquesa, which has been one of the most promising. And this is some more pictures of our work. And in this area, even in mines that historically are not copper mines, we always found evidence of copper. So what it was economically worth in the 19th century or in the early 20th century, and what stays in the records of the minerary district does not mean that there wasn't copper before. You can actually find both copper oxide and chalcopyrite a little bit everywhere. And we have been discussing with geologists that you wouldn't expect Bronze Age people to try to extract copper from these very small crystals and crush the stones. So it's probably so that in prehistoric time there were outcrops of mineral that probably were very visible, and that's also possible why we probably don't find evidence of mining, because there were no needs to dig big shafts. It was probably very much in the surface. We will see. We keep looking. We are going soon again. And if you go to the museum in Cagliari, you see that there are tools, stone tools. And these are the typical tools that you would expect in a mining area. In Andalusia, in the mining area, the Bronze Age mines that are in southeastern Spain, you find thousands of, hundreds and hundreds of them. I've seen them from the documentation from the last surveys. They're still not published, and they put yellow pieces of paper on each of them before they would collect, and the whole valley was full. They are still there, and they all. Some of the excavation confirm Bronze Age dates. So it's very impressive, and they look exactly like this, or like this one here. And as you can see, there is no doubt that Nuragic people were able to use the method. I think I should go towards conclusion. I showed this. This is the the richest mineral areas of Sardinia. So we have the Iglesiente, the southwestern part of the island. We have an area here where we have been surveying, but we found while here it was very easy to find material, here it's been really, really difficult. So we have very few samples. And then we have this area in the north where we are going now this summer. We have been collecting, let's see, I can put this already. So we have been collecting and analyzing almost 50 samples, where it's going to be 80 in the end. In this plot, you see the old ones and only 16, the yellow ones from our project. And they plot very nicely on the old analysis from the 80s, confirming that what we know about the isotopic fields of Sardinia probably is correct. Differently from the previous analysis, we will soon have also the trace element for all of them, so we will be able to characterize the Sardinian fields in details. And this is the area that we surveyed, and I think I will go a little bit faster about this. Here is just that you can see that there is a lot of problems in interpretation, because these are the Sardinian in gray, the Italian Alps in green, and then you have the Spanish samples, and they all fall very close to each other. So the chemical composition will be very important in order to differentiate the difference, the origin of the different metals. And this we can skip. And what about who traveled with the metals? Were the Sardinian involved in individuals from Sardinia involved in the trade? We believe it is possible. First of all, of course, for the metal analysis. Second, because of the ceramics, because we believe that the ceramics will not travel by themselves and they will be used by people of Sardinian origin. And then we have been considering, together with Christian Christiansen, that because we do have these studies about the genetics of Mediterranean and the Italian peninsula, that Sardinia always sticks out and looks different from the rest and seems very conservative. In all DNA studies, it seems like there hasn't been any major change. This is to be discussed, and but in any case, so far, it seems to have received very little influx from other areas. And this could be a suggestion. This suggests that maybe Sardinian people were actually a very good seafarer, and then they were very good at coming back home. And they didn't need anybody to settle in Sardinia for the trade because they were doing it. You can convince me of the opposite. But in all this, as I said, now we come to the almost last slide about the 10. So we have Sardinia. In Sardinia, there might be some 10. There are some. There is at least one 10 mine. Most geologists would say that it would be impossible to use this 10 because it's very deep in the rock during prehistoric time. And I'm really not able to argue against this. But it seems also, Daniel Berger from the CESA laboratory in Mannheim, he has been analyzed the 10 isotope in several items, and he doesn't, it seems that when you manage to find the origin of the 10, it always shows either Cornwall and Spain, Portugal, or the Near East. Very seldom what could be the Sardinian 10. So probably they didn't use their own, but as I said, there is a lot of 10 on Sardinia. There are even small 10 objects. There is a small juglet made of 10, a pure 10, very little. And if you see here, so Sardinia is really in between two one region which is very, very rich in 10, and one region which is very, very rich in everything except 10, and is producing a lot of bronze. So it's really in a very big need of 10. In particularly Cyprus. Cyprus is producing enormous quantity of copper and is producing copper objects in large quantities and doesn't have any 10, or there are no 10 resources within easy reach, but they have strong contact with Sardinia, it seems so. So the idea is that maybe our idea and what has been driving the project is that Sardinian communities somehow managed to to direct the trade of tan from the Atlantic Europe to the Eastern Mediterranean. The Eastern Mediterranean, of course, can use also this, but it's probably using both. And the tan ingots that have been found along the coast of Israel, according to analysis, show to be made Cornish tan. So it's very clear and very possible that Sardinian seafarers were the ones that brought the Atlantic tan to the Eastern Mediterranean. And it's not the case, as I showed you before, that when we see objects made of Sardinian coppers outside Sardinia, quite a large cluster end up in the channel. I think it's a good suggestion that this is a great possibility. And before we close, the last thing that we have been started working just this year is how did they do that? Did they have both? Did they have? We don't have any evidence for both except this, which is quite strong evidence. It's over 150 bronze miniature boats. Unfortunately, none of them comes from a archaeological context. And the only ones that are dated have been found in mainland Italy in very late context. They have been found in Villanova and Grace from the 8th, 9th century BC. So, but it is very difficult to believe when you know the figurines from Sardinia that all these boats were produced in at the end of the in a full early Iron Age when they looked so nuragic indeed. And it's also that there is this, as you see here, on the mast of this boat, there is always they always recall the nuragic tower. This has been interpreted as the top of the nuragic tower. So, and the last thing we have done, and this is my last picture, is if these were representing somehow nuragic shape, what kind of shape would that be? And since Sardinia was probably a very densely populated island, an island where wood was very precious, was used to build, was used to extract metal and so on and so forth, maybe you wouldn't have enough good wood to also organize a fleet. And then we found a project from Bretagne where they have been actually sailing around the Nordic Sea with a leather boat. And this is a typical Irish and medieval Irish and from the British Island. And it seems to work very well. It's made with the cow hide. It's a very long and complicated process. But all these boats always suggest that there is a connection to animals, and who knows? We're working on how could we possibly prove this if it's true. We'll see. So this was it.